There are few things worse than an uncomfortable dinner party. Or, at least, few that I could think of as I pushed my fork through the whipped potatoes on my plate. Seriously, why wasn't anyone saying anything? The silence was deafening. I managed to keep a polite smile firmly plastered on my face, even as my mind swirled with possible conversation starters. But as I jettisoned each one in rapid succession, the uncomfortable lull stretched. The only sound in the over-decorated dining room was the sterling silver utensils clanking against the gold-rimmed fine china plates. At least the food was good. If I were indulging in the meal without an audience, I had no doubt I'd have wolfed down the entire plate already. As it was, I took careful, small bites as I carved into what I could only assume was $100 pot roast, accompanied by a mouth-watering mushroom gravy, the whipped potatoes, and a mix of pearl onions and glazed carrots. It was my guess that the food was catered, or maybe prepared in-house by a private chef. I made a mental note to ask Clint about it later. His mother was the one hosting us, but I knew she hadn't cooked. If the formidable Ms. Cleaver, formerly Mrs. Bridges, had ever cooked, those days were long gone now. Even before her health began to fail, she'd employed a house full of staff to see to her every need. I glanced up from my plate and noticed Clint giving me a concerned look. We'd joked on the drive over about whether or not to come up with some sort of code word, a verbal ripcord we could pull if things got too awkward. We arrived before landing on one, and the joke fizzled as we walked up the stamped driveway to his mother's front door. I tried to manage a restrained smile in his direction, if only to reassure him I was still hanging in there, albeit by a thread. However, I wasn't sure how convincing I looked. It wasn't his fault his mother was frosty enough she could live quite happily in her fancy Sub-Zero fridge. Our relationship was still in the early phase, where little things could all too quickly become big things. I didn't want this tension between me and his mother to cause issues. Smiling, I reached for the stem of my wine glass and brought the burgundy liquid to my lips. I was too tense to really savor it, but the oaky flavor left a pleasant aftertaste. "This was a lovely meal, Sandra. Thank you for having us," I said, my voice coming out stiffer than I intended. Clint's mother lifted her white linen napkin from her lap and brought it to her lips. She dabbed the fabric at the corners of her mouth with a frail and bony hand. Her coloring was paler than the last time I'd seen her,